Welcome back. We're finishing the model today. Well, not today. This is several videos strung together, but we're priming and gonna start getting some detail on this thing. I want to do a heavy weathering for this, so we're gonna get out some different things. This is a mixture of my sort of homebrew paint and primer. It's not going to be, this is just a base coat. I want this to be over top the primer just to seal everything in and give it some base color. So the primer for the next layers to go on, because as I'm weathering it, it's going to be pretty heavy weathering. I don't want to remove the paint all the way back down to the primer, so this coat is to protect the primer. The mix on this is just some craft paint with some matte polyurethane mixed in, and then it's thinned down to go through the airbrush. It's going to go on in like a couple of three really light coats. Again, this is just to sort of seal in the primer that the next layers of paint are going to go on top of. So I want it good, and I want a good coverage on this. Next, we're coming in with some Vallejo colors in earth tones, and I'm going to kind of start with this sort of middle dark red, and that's going to be sort of the overall tone, and then we'll be bringing in some lighter and darker tones to create a kind of a gradient going from slightly lighter at the top to quite a bit darker down right along the bottom edge. The story of this pod is that it was left in the wrong place. The planet it was supposed to be a sort of a temperate place with a lot of vegetation growing, but instead it was left in a desert. And the passenger that was in the pod with all of his equipment woke up when the unit ran out of power. So now he's stuck in this desert and is trying to figure out how to get out. Picking out the color for the pod was, well, not a challenge, but it took a second. So I wanted it to be blue, and at first I wanted a little bit of metallic in it, but as I got to working around with the different paints I had, didn't like any of them. And then I settled in on just Vallejo flat blue, and it was perfect.
Well, there's the blue I want right there. I don't have to make it.
So that's the rust layer done, and I need to protect it before I start in on the weathering and paint layers. So I grabbed up a can of Krylon Color Max Flat Crystal Clear and just gave the whole thing a good light coating of about a coat and a half. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the Stasis tubes on top, but I did know I want them to be weathered. But I decided I wanted them to be stainless steel, so I got out just the silver and gave everything a good coat of silver, and then did flat black for the little cooling fins. In the previous video, well, yeah, there is a previous video, and I'll put a link where you can find it. But in the previous video, the items here, this thing is a heat exchanger, and I decided for metallic green on that. I'm using Vallejo chipping medium and liquid mask for the weathering on this. And after a quick bit of bottle maintenance, the liquid mask is going to be used on strategic areas, not all over the whole thing, but to be able to just, it's the latex, it'll just be able to peel it right back off again, taking the paint with it and revealing the underlying material. Laying it down in a random pattern, it's gonna look very realistic as the large chunks of paint peeling off of a smooth surface. This is one of the more enjoyable parts of modeling for me, is imagining how things are used and how you interact with them and what happens to them when you interact with them. Like for instance, this will look like where you're have been going in and out of the door and brushing against this and things banging against it, and then in the little crevices there, it'll be where water and dust is collected, and when you pull that back off, the paint it'll look like just dirty cracks and crevices. So I'm imagining this thing sitting in an exposed environment. It's kind of up against a cliff face. So the backside is going to be a little more protected. It's not going to be weathered as much, but this side's going to be taking the brunt of everything that's coming at it. Dust storms, wind, rain, whatever you got coming. And it's going to batter the edges, and that's where the paint is going to be coming off the most. So I didn't mention this before, but the reason I picked out the color earlier before I started this process with the weathering is that I wanted to imagine the interplay between the different colors. So there's the original color of the container versus the, where the paint's missing and the metal has started to oxidize. And so the chipping medium went on thick. I mean, it came sputtering out of the airbrush. It just sort of laid on there in globs, if you will, which, after a second or two, I was like, oh, no, this is maybe what I want. So I kind of continued on with it, but then to just sort of lay everything down and smooth it out a little bit, and I came back and just laid a little light layer of my paint thinner over top of that, just to sort of help it lay down. The Vallejo flat blue went on really nice with just like a couple of coats, and my new improved thinner formula, it worked great. It's got a little. I'll do a little video on that here in a bit, but the blue I picked, and I'm doing the whole container in blue, everything except for some of the components. So this thing would have been painted in mass in a factory, and they weren't gonna, it was built to do a job, and being just pretty colors didn't need to be gussied up or anything. So just straight blue, except for the Stasis generator, which is that little gadget in the front there, and then the other components on top. Other than that, the whole thing's pretty much blue, and it's like you find a modern container, and it's, whatever color it is, it's pretty much that color, except maybe for some signage. So they just paint it one monolithic color. It finished up with the coupler and the bumpers that, protect the mothership. I let that cure for a day before starting in on the chipping. I'm using a silicone brush here that just sort of grabs that latex and pulls it off. It's doing an okay job, but it's not the brush was not the best quality, I'm afraid. I picked it up to just sort of try it out, and this was the first thing I used it on, and it's doing okay, but I think you'll see what happens here in just a second. It comes apart. I really like the pattern it's creating, but the latex takes a little extra effort to make sure you get it all off. Otherwise, you're leaving a lump behind instead of a chip. You really got to use your imagination when you're doing stuff like this, because you go, how long did it take to get this way? How long was it there? What were the conditions? The paint, was it the heat, or a combination of the heat, wind, dirt, sand, that's caused this? So as you're going through the process, you imagine, okay, the heat peeled that paint up and then the wind blew it off, or that was just a windstorm blew up against the side of it and just sort of scoured the rest of this off. So as you go along, you're going, okay, a little wind damage there, a little rain damage there, a little sun damage there, and then as you try to get them to all look as, want it to be coherent when it's done. Almost forgot to turn the camera back on again. The chipping fluid now is the paint's laying on top of the chipping fluid, and it's water activated. So just the wetter you get it, the more loose it comes. Also, the heavier you laid it on to start with, and the more of the paint's going to come off of those areas. So I'm using just a stiff, I don't know, it's like a plant fiber, a heavy plant fiber little brush, just cheap brush, and it's coming off quite nice. Again, you use your imagination. What caused this? Was this wind, rain, dirt, dust, you know, coming through the atmosphere possibly. Who knows? But as you just got to imagine as the how was it used? What's it? How did you want it to be used? How does it imagine? Imagine how has this interacted with the world? Was it used before it got to space? Was this like a second, third trip? Who knows? I'm sure these things would not be inexpensive to build, and reusability would be an important aspect. It's if you can hang on to it. So that's the chipping done, and I'm really happy with this. It's got the look I want. Now the weathering's not completely finished yet. There's still going to be some washes got to go on this, but that's going to be more. I want those washes need to be tied together to the diorama that it's going to be sitting in. So I'm going to wait until we get the diorama in, and then I can weather the diorama and the pod all at the same time. That way you're looking for a coherent story when you're looking at it. I am not wild about these little control panels I've made here. The buttons and lights don't look like buttons and lights. They look like little dots of paint, and I'm not exactly sure what to do about that. Well, actually, I have an idea. I didn't have an idea then, but I do now about how to work on that, and we'll maybe explore that in a later video. But for now, just know that these are not my favorite. Yeah, not my favorite. What I am digging is this sort of green. It's Vallejo flat green with just a little touch of silver metallic, and I'm not going to go as far as saying it's iridescent, but it's pretty cool color. So I had a thought about how to improve these keypads, and this was sort of my first foray into this experiment. It's very much like a little tiny matte painting. So the trick was to put down the buttons and then paint onto the plastic, and then put down the background over top of that. So it looks like it's part of the panel. Again, the buttons themselves suck. I've got an idea for those that I'm going to be working with, and that'll be in a future video for sure. But for now, it's not my favorite. So we're coming into the home stretch here. We're working on the final assembly of all the components. So we're reinstalling the heat exchanger onto the top of the pod. The cables that run out of the heat exchanger into the top of the pod, and from the stasis generator up to the stasis tubes on top, these are just conduit, and you can tell by looking at them they take a lot of heat. So they've been gone through a lot of heating and cooling cycles. So putting the antenna on, that's just a quick bit of putty just for temporary, because if it's sticking up there and it's glued tight, I will break it off. So this is just sort of looking at the final placement before getting the glue out and locking everything in place. So I kind of like that, and so we just found a few other little flourishes to put onto the. I haven't named this little orange component yet. Don't know. Maybe if you've got an idea of what I could call that, put it in the comments. And don't just give it a backstory. What does it do? So it's not an antenna, because the antenna is sitting next to it. But so what does that do? Let me know. So now we've got everything sort of glued in place. Everything's glued in place. We've got all the little bits and pieces on it, and it's more or less finished for now. Again, it will get incorporated into a diorama, so there will be more weathering done to it with some washes and some powders and things in the upcoming video. But for now, I'm calling that finished, and I'm tickled pink with it overall. Again, buttons aside, it's fantastic. I'm having a ball building this thing. And yeah, thank you for joining me, and go make something.